Thank you so much, Mark. Gazit, you are actually staying on stage with us for our next panel. And please help me welcome our moderator, my friend and colleague, Abhishek Sengupta, Head of Multimedia at Khalij Times, and our distinguished panelists, Bruce Gurfein, the CEO of Connect, Sachhyam Regmi, founding partner at Yas Investments and Spartech Ventures, and Itzik Ozer, the Head of Business Development at the Jerusalem Development Authority. Please help me give them a warm welcome.
Thank you, Michal. Thank you very much for that lovely introduction. It's a bit of correction. Dr. Tillman will be joining us in place of Itzik. Just find our place. I think that's the place I should be in. Right. We'll still wait for Dr. Tillman to join us. Sabah al-Khair, Boker Tov, and a very good morning. My name is Abhishek Sengupta, and one thing I can surely say as the head of multimedia at what has been UAE's longest running English daily, tech is something that's been an integral part of our lives. Although we try and understand it in our own ways, we can surely say tech is something that's helped advance whatever we do. But what happens when you throw tech in the world of finance? For most of us, probably, is just another portmanteau. Fintech sounds a bit like Tex-Mex and rom-com, but I'm pretty sure there's much more to that. And we've got a very, very distinguished panel today. I'd like to start with Mark Gazit, who we just heard give a long presentation on how Fintech has helped serve across sectors and across the globe. Mark, let's begin with you. I know you've had a long sort of journey from New York, and we spoke yesterday, and we were talking briefly. Very quickly, to start this off, how has Fintech revolutionized the way banking institutions operate in Israel, in the US, and you see the potential here in the UAE if it hasn't already?
Yeah, definitely. And if you think about it, in a way, financial institutions is almost like a mirror of the society. You know, when I think since humanity remembers itself, there was trade. And there's always a need to fuel the trade. Now the world becoming flatter. The borders disappear, at least commercial borders. And the financial institutions going through this revolution very fast. If you think about it historically, even 5 years ago, 10 years ago, banking was the question of geography. Different regulations, different areas. People were physically coming to a place called a branch, writing, something called a check. In some countries, people still do it, but it's disappearing. It's disappearing because today it's all digital. Think about yourself. I know that COVID-19 probably pushed the progress 5 years forward. At least there is something positive about COVID. Not many things. How many of you were in the branch of a bank recently? I bet none.
I haven't been for a long, long time.
Exactly. Why should
I don't
you do
remember
it?
the last time I was there.
Why should
Except
you do
for
it?
the fact that when my PIN got blocked because I forgot my password. But then, you don't really need to.
Exactly.
Before I move on to Bruce and Sash as well, very quickly, what is that one fintech in your mind right now that's breaking all trends at the top of everyone's consciousness at this point in time? What would that one fintech be? And you think it's got huge potential in a place like the United Arab Emirates?
Yeah, so the cross-border payments, definitely. I strongly believe that UAE becoming the financial hub of the world, very successfully competing with Hong Kong, Singapore, etc. And it's an amazing opportunity because UAE is not just a UAE. It's a gateway to GCC. It's a gateway to Africa. Somebody told me that in 3 hours flight distance from Dubai, there are 3 billion people living.
You're in the middle of the earth.
Exactly. Yeah. This is the middle of the financial world. Absolutely.
Right. Let's bring Bruce at this point in time. Bruce, of course, works for Connect, which is the private investment arm of Mr. Al-Nabuda, and he's someone who invests in fintech, amongst others. Bruce, I'm sure you have interest not just here in the UAE, but also in Israel. What is that one fintech that's really sort of giving you all the kicks at this point in time?
Well, as Mark said, the UAE being the central hub for world financing, both with all the migrant workers sending money away and different investors looking to relocate their headquarters to the UAE, benefiting from all the great COVID practices that have been practiced over the last year. We've been looking for technologies that will allow us to utilize our migrant workers within the group and some of the other families within the UAE, allowing them to benefit from these new innovative fintech. So as opposed to them today having to take their card, go to an ATM machine, pull the money out, transfer it back home to Bangladesh, we're looking to utilize technologies that will give them a full platform, both building the first digital bank in Bangladesh and allowing them to really move everything from one point to another and really utilizing that ecosystem to move forward. Anything that works, anything that's easy to use, anything that moves us away from using that card or using that check is something that we're looking to invest in. We're looking to integrate within an existing ecosystem that will allow us to move forward.
Sash, let us hear from you at this stage. You are obviously also investors with interest across the board, different sectors around the world, and we were talking about how possibilities between Israel and UAE have opened up. What is it that you're planning right now? What's keeping you guys interested as far as fintech is concerned in Israel?
Sure, certainly. So first I'll touch a little bit on the fintech scene out here in UAE itself. What we've seen in the past few years is that we've seen a huge rise in consumer finance. So when we say consumer finance fintech, those are consumer-facing solutions. So be it buy now, pay later, be it digital bank, be it robo-advisory such as Sarwa. These things have really picked up over the last few years and have been raising quite a lot of equity rounds. However, one thing you look at these companies is that they're always, in a sense, constrained by their balance sheet. So for a BNPL company to really scale, be on that Klarna level, they would always need to have that balance sheet to be able to lend it to the customers, right? From that perspective, what we thought is that, hey, how did those global companies manage to get to that level? And when we looked at it closer, we understood that those startups were able to tap into something called venture debt. And that is something that's severely lacking in this region. There's, of course, a lot of VC firms. We have one as well. But venture debt as an asset class is missing component here. So we thought to ourselves, okay, let's try to structure a venture debt fund. Let's see what we can do with that. And as we were thinking about that process, and we are not only fintech investors, we're also fintech adopters. So we started thinking to ourselves, what can we bring into our venture debt fund that would allow us to automate the process better, to understand the various data points we get from startups better, and eventually be able to understand the quantum and the terms of investments in those venture debt deals. And that's where as we were looking for this, we came across a company that's actually based out of Tel Aviv called Liquidity Capital. It's a firm that has technology to deploy in venture debt opportunities, as well as they already deploy it from their offices in New York, Singapore, and Tel Aviv, with Meta, Dash, and MUFG as their sponsors. So we initiated a conversation and eventually engaged with them, and now we're signing a partnership whereby we'll be launching a 50-50 venture debt fund to provide venture debt solutions to high-growth startups in the region. And this is just one of the examples that the Accord has, resulted in. Otherwise, we would not be able to go out there in the market, find a partner like that, engage with the partner like that, and eventually, close the deal.
Absolutely. In fact, we've covered a lot of ground as far as UAE and Israel ties, business ties are concerned, and that is one real example that we've just heard. Mark, I know you've offices in New York, of course, very much in Tel Aviv, and huge interest in Dubai. What is one thing that you're talking about right now with the authorities here? I mean, I know when I just heard your presentation talking about big data and security, and you yourself is a data security expert, if you like. I want you to touch down upon the fact that I'm sure all of us are aware that UAE earlier this year established an executive office to fight money laundering and funding for terrorism. Do you see a prospect there as an expert coming in?
Absolutely, absolutely. And you know, just to make it clear, though, and I would really like to show my admiration to the UAE government, because at the end of the day, when transactions are more secure, it's possible to do more business. So
exactly.
Fighting terrorist funding and human trafficking and money laundering is not limitation factor. It actually allows much more business to be done. I have to say that we see very positive signs. It's not a secret that we are opening our office here. We do it tomorrow. There is a beautiful event, which is part of this event that we do at DIFC. I think that UAE, by establishing DIFC and ADGM, two special administrative regions for fintechs, it's an amazing move. And there are 3,000 fintechs registered in UAE. And we're definitely speaking with all of them to allow them to have much smoother and better way to serve the customers, allow the customers to transfer money, and still being compliant to all the regulations, both in UAE, United States, and in the world. So it's a great, great place for us, definitely.
Absolutely. Bruce, you did mention something very interesting, how you've sort of tried and revolutionized the lives of, for example, Bangladeshi workers here, migrant workers. Now, if you were to take that model out of the UAE to the rest of the world, and let's say you've got interest in Israel, how do you do that? That model may not work, but is there anything else that you've got in mind that probably will say, this is love from the UAE for Israel, this tech is for Israel from the UAE?
Well, I guess if there's one thing Israel could definitely learn from the UAE would be to reduce the bureaucracy and the process involved in setting up a new business or getting a new license. The joint venture between the efficiency in the UAE and the innovation from a technology side in Israel is something that's going to lead this world forward and definitely going to bring us to the next level. In today's being a one global village, there's no such thing as a business model that works in the UAE and therefore doesn't work in Israel or in Bangladesh or any other country for that matter. We're all people trying to have a good life and move forward, using fintech in order to not have to remember what our signature was on our check 20 years ago when we opened that bank account, but rather just do it with our fingerprint that doesn't usually change. And that's really what we're trying to achieve with getting this fintech and getting technology out there. Whatever business platform will work in the UAE will, with minor adjustments, work anywhere in the world. And it's great that we're able to live here in the UAE and utilize the benefits the government gives us to have an easy life opening these businesses, a great test cradle to figure out that it really works, and then duplicate it across the world.
Absolutely. We're unfortunately running out of time, but I'll quickly get Sash in, and then I'd like to finish this panel, this particular panel, with Mark. Sash, you did mention that you've now already signed a deal with Israel. How exciting is that? Do you think, very quickly, do you think that is going to sort of trigger a new trend, people looking westward and definitely to the capital of Israel?
Sure, certainly. I think it's I mean, both the parties, our partners and ourselves, we're very excited about that. And then, I mean, we are seeing inbound, not only for this particular deal, but we've also looked at, we've also been approached by several food tech focused Israeli funds that want to set up their offices here. First of all, to address the food security need that's out here.
Wow.
Second of all, also because, they, as I think someone in the panel mentioned, it's basically a hub of the world. You're like 3 hours away from everything.
It's a global capital, so...
Yes. If you set up something here with, really interesting food technology, you'd be able to, land into all these different countries and expand into those countries.
Yes, absolutely. You've summed that right. Mark will finish this panel for now, of course, we'll continue this discussion off the record, probably over a cup of coffee. Mark, very quickly, we would love to know, what is it that attracted you to Dubai? I mean, you've got probably a swanky office in New York, in Tel Aviv. Where does Dubai stand? And if you can give us a quick comparison, what is it that attracted you the most?
Definitely. So, yeah, we do have offices in Tel Aviv, in New York, also in Singapore, London, Mexico, etc. I have to say that this place is special, and maybe surprisingly so. On a cultural level, this is amazing. It's almost like coming home. I do business here for a while, for the last 20 years, but, you know, there are many similarities between Israel and UAE. Two countries are pretty small countries. Two countries grow by serving global economies because the local markets are relatively small. And the more time I spend here, the more time I discover that we in Israel have so many things to learn from you guys. That's amazing. And we hope that there are also some things that we can contribute as well. And even the weather is similar. So
absolutely. You were talking about the fact that you're coming from some 16 degrees in New York, and hello and welcome to Dubai, 38 degrees right now. Well, we'll leave it at that, Mark. I'm sure you'll get a lot of time to get yourself acquainted with the weather here. And of course, we've got some lovely people. Sure. And thank you for your time, gentlemen. And we'll let this be taken over by Michal for the next proceedings. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Abhishek.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I thought you came to visit me.